That's a touching piece, and it leads us to a next segment of the show. How can we break these chains of suffering? What are the cures or remedies for the deprivation complication?
I think that the remedies really lie in affirming people, places, and things. For example, the person who's been deprived can make it a point, make a decision that he'll begin to orbit affirming people, places, and things. People who, well, people, for example, who provide a lot of attention, affection, and approval. That's very genuine.
So people, places, and things.
Yes.
What kind of people would you say are, like, can you give examples of people who are good examples of affirming people?
Yes, yes. I think when we're talking about affirming people, we're talking about people who radiate goodness, they radiate truth, they radiate beauty. I think they're people who are naturally affectionate, who give the full presence of their being to others so that when others are in their orbit, they really believe that they're really in a loving relationship. I think that's the key, that it's a loving relationship.
Anything else?
Well, I think as well, we could be talking about a person who's very sensitive to others, someone who is actually unselfish in their love of other people, someone who leads a calm and unhurried life, someone humble, someone who is morally very self-restrained, an affirming person, a psychologically strengthening person.
This person, would it matter the gender of this person?
Well, actually, to a certain degree, yes, although there are no hard and fast rules. I think if the depriving person in a person's life has been a man and the person is a man, it'd be good to choose a male affirmer. However, if it's a woman who's had a depriving male in her life, it would be better to choose an older man to avoid the complication of romantic attraction. And of course, if the depriving person was a woman and you're a woman, it's better to select a woman as your affirming person. And if you're a man, again, the idea of the prudence of choosing a man who is older would really reduce the possibility of any romantic attraction.
Could you give an example of an individual who would be an affirming person that is well known, that maybe all viewers could identify with? Or?
Right, I think perhaps Mother Teresa comes readily to mind as an affirming woman. And as far as an affirming man, I think of Pope John Paul II. I think religious figures are good to look for affirming persons, but also I think Maria von Trapp from The Sound of Music is really so affirming in the way that she plays with the children, handles the children, just the way she really makes them feel significant and special. It really comes out in the film. And some of our viewers might be familiar as well with Dr. James Dobson, who is a Christian psychologist who on his radio programs comes across as really strengthening his listeners psychologically. He's very, very warm and healing in his presence.
Speaking of Dr. Dobson, would professional counseling be a remedy for deprivation syndrome?
Yes, it certainly would, especially in the moderate cases, in the serious cases, and of course profound. It's absolutely necessary. And I think the key is perhaps to look for more spiritual, religiously oriented counselors and therapists who'd be more likely to radiate this presence naturally so it's not a put-on. And I think we have to really warn people that they should beware of dealers in pseudo-affirmation, people who are really not authentically that way, loving and caring and strengthening, but who put it on for their own reasons.
So now we mentioned people. Now places? What would be examples of places, affirming places?
All right, I think perhaps most people can appreciate being at the beach as an affirming place where they're sitting on the sand and it's very soft and comfortable and the sun's rays are beating down on them and they just take in the smell of the sea air and see the waves and listen to the waves, and all their senses are really active when they're on the beach, and it's something that is just a strengthening experience that most people can identify with. I think the beach is certainly one affirming place, and perhaps even a seaport, being able to be on a pier looking out over the water, looking at the boats go by, and just really at some level to commune with the place that has these elements which really stimulate the senses and develop one's emotional life, I think are good examples.
So nature would be a good place. How about
Yes.
any other
Yes.
places?
Well, I think maybe a botanical garden would be a good place. An open meadow, being surrounded by trees in a forest, for example, would be good. Putting oneself by a stream, listening to the waters, the sound of the stones, the waters rushing over the stones, and really listening with the full presence of one's being to what's out there.
Okay, now you said things. Can you give an example of things?
That are affirming. I would say, for example, the sand boxes would be a place to just, as kids do, just jump in and start to touch the sand and feel its moisture, especially when you add water, and play with sand castles and make sand castles. Also, the kind of things that you could find in a children's museum, where adults and children can both go and really experience a lot of living things and also inanimate objects. I mean, for example, handling lizards or touching different elements of arts and crafts projects would be an example of trying to develop one's emotional life and make it more sensitive to creation and what's out there.
So things, you would also include living things, so even,
Yes.
how about even a pet or like a dog?
Yes,
Or
definitely. A dog, a cat would certainly be affirming living things that would provide affection and attention. And I think it's very affirming to have animals around, especially when you're growing up.
Especially as a child.
That's right.
That animals, like a cat, would be very, very affirming.
That's
a
right.
living thing.
Living thing, that's right. That has some of those qualities, even the human qualities of affection, warmth, that could develop as a bonding process with the person who is deprived and really needs that kind of contact.
So people, places, and things.
That's right.
That are all take place, or all a part of this affirming living.
That's right. It's what creation has to offer us. That's what we're talking about. People, places, and things.
Okay, now also one place I think of is church, and some people with religious beliefs may believe they don't need the things you mentioned. They can say, I can go directly to God. I have God. I don't need anyone else, anyone or anything else.
Well, certainly, I would not want to take anything away from them. Spiritual affirmation is very important. The kind of affirmation that develops in the context of prayer, relationship with God is very important. But remember, I had talked earlier about the biological, psychological, and spiritual birth. There's an important stage prior to the spiritual mission, the spiritual stage, and that's the psychological. Jesus, for example, was incarnate, God incarnate, and he actually had to be raised in an affirming family context to receive the emotional and social maturity that he needed for his spiritual mission. And so I think we need to look at that, and we need to look at that model as being very significant and really telling people that it's important not to try to skip over that psychological affirmation.
So the Holy Family, that would be a very good image